Hello and good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Aico TV. I'm Alex Garmston.
And I'm Holly Moore.
And today we're back in the Aico TV studio and we have an action-packed episode for you, and here is what's coming up.
First up, our Regional Specification Manager Alex Parker sits down with Paul Meadows from Salus Approved Inspectors.
Then the Fire Industry Association joins us again with our National Account Manager Paul Cartwright and National Technical Manager Andy Speake.
Next, we take a look at Tony Boyle's Ideas Lab with Chartered Institute of Housing.
Then we have our frequently asked question: what sort of sensor types are on the market?
So first up today, we have our Regional Specification Manager Alex Parker, who's going to be sitting down with Paul Meadows, the Director of Salus Approved Inspectors. Together, they're going to be discussing the change in building control over the last 15 years, how Salus work to support their clients, and where the company is heading to in the future. So let's head over to them now.
Hello, I'm Alex Parker, Regional Specification Manager for Aico, covering the East Midlands. Today I'm here with Paul Meadows, Director and owner of Salus Building Control in Hinckley, Leicestershire. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Alex.
We've had a lot of conversations over the last few months about building control, best practice, stemmed from some training we did together. It's great to have you here. First of all, do you want to just go ahead and tell us who you are, who Salus are, and what you do as a company?
Yeah, Salus are an approved inspector. We are licensed by the Secretary of State through the Construction Industry Council. We are a nationwide building control body. That's predominantly our major role.
And so, from my understanding, building control used to be purely under the jurisdiction of local authorities. I know that that's changed, obviously, with your company and other companies. When did it change, and what was the reason for that, introducing private companies into the sector?
It was part of the Conservative government with Michael Heseltine, and they advocated through the Building Act 1984, explored the possibility of competition.
Yeah.
So they wanted competition in the sector of building control rather than just having a local authority building control. So 1985, Building Act came out, and it has evolved since then. The very first approved inspector was NHBC. You will have known that they're an approved inspector, but they're also a warranty provider.
On new builds, is that right?
Typically new build homes, warranties on new homes, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So they were the first, and then it took probably around about 8 or 9 years before it started to open up to creation of approved inspectors. First 3 around about 1988.
Yeah. How long have you been in business for?
We are in our 19th year of trading.
Wow,
so
okay.
we are the 18th approved inspector. First 3, as I say, were in 1988. We started in 2003, beginning of 2003. Wow. So we're in our 19th year now.
Business going well?
Well, it's been challenging. In 19 years, we had a recession in 2006, 2007. Yeah. That was challenging because construction obviously tends to be one of the first to hit a recession and the slowest to come out of a recession. And of course, with what we've had with the pandemic in the last year or so, then that's been a challenge. It's been a challenge for everybody to have a regulatory role whereby you're there as part of consumer protection to make sure buildings are safe for users, to have this resistance with trying to not have too much contact with contractors or homeowners, if that's the case, or whatever it might well be. So yeah, it's been challenging. It's been challenging in those 19 years. Yeah. And we always had the view that we never ever wanted to be the biggest approved inspector, and we're not the biggest approved inspector. We will sit somewhere in the top 10 of around about 100 or so approved inspectors. But what we do very much want to do is advocate being very good at what we do, giving clients surety. That's the important thing.
Sure. I mean, in our conversations, we've discussed best practice a lot, haven't we? You know, we here at Aico, we're a best practice manufacturer. Everything we do is about best practice. You share that same ethos over at Salus. Yeah. Why is best practice such a big focus for yourselves, and why should it be for the whole industry?
Well, I think once we had Grenfell, the whole focus of construction was under the spotlight, and obviously there's been the public inquiries that have started and are continuing to go, and also the research that was carried out by Dame Judith into how the construction industry works and how much control, credibility it has. And many parts of the whole construction industry have been under the spotlight. And it is important to make sure that as part of the role that we play is part of delivering that reassurance that we are part of a jigsaw that makes sure there are compliant buildings there.
Yeah.
You know, we can't do it all. We're not there every day. We're not the ones who ultimately are responsible for delivering compliant buildings. It is the person who carries out the work themselves who are responsible with compliant in the same way as with the products that you provide.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I can refer back to our conversation we had earlier this morning, you said that following the recession in 2008, 2009, the construction industry changed. And then, you're talking about now how your sector's changed post-Grenfell in terms of compliance. What impact did that recession have in 2008, 2009 on the overall construction industry? And how is that still affecting us today?
I think in 2008, 2009, we were in a very much different situation than we are now, because we moved on by in excess of 10 years. And what we have a problem with in our part of the profession is competent staff. There's a shortage in our profession across the board, probably somewhere in the order of maybe 4,000 or so approved building control professionals, somewhere around about that number. But of course, as we get that little bit older, then the training and the need to train the younger ones to become competent to deal with a variety of buildings, from a kitchen extension to a building as tall as Grenfell or more, or a shopping centre or whatever it might well be. There is a need to make sure that it's a lifelong learning construction. You don't become qualified and that's it, you know everything. You absolutely do not know everything at all from day one. And and having been in building control now for some 30 years, then you learn all the time. The regulations change all the time, so you have to keep moving forward. And as part of that, the impact of that was, a few years ago, we actually set up a training academy.
Okay.
We set up a building control training academy, that's what it's called. And it's taken 4 years or so of continual development to try and focus on training the new members of staff and dedicating time to that as well. There are not so many good quality training courses that when we became qualified, you used to be able to go and do a college diploma or a building control degree in building control.
Okay.
You won't find that now.
Well, I was going to ask you that. So there's no requirement to go to university or?
Well, the requirements in terms of professional qualifications are led by our professional bodies, typically RICS or CABE, Chartered Association of Building Engineers.
Okay.
They are the two predominant building control faculty professional institutes that our staff are members of. But like I say, you can become qualified, and once you become qualified, we will have the same qualifications then, really, from that point of view. So you could become qualified in your early 20s, or you could be qualified in your 60 plus years of age. You've got the same qualifications. But you haven't got the lifelong skills, and it's really important to focus on delivering continual development, really, because I say it's not something that you learn and that's it. Once you've learned it, it doesn't change.
It's like any profession, isn't it?
Well, regulations a few years ago, they were getting changed too often, and there was a focus to try and get them to reduce down to around about every 6 years, so that industry could get used to the changes that came into effect before they changed again. Fire safety wise, certainly post Grenfell, has changed easily 4 times in terms of the guidance, the tight-knit controls, just as the focus of what the learning curves have been post-Grenfell, of what our needs are to help support compliant buildings.
I guess to those in our industry who are not as focused, or who don't share your focus on best practice, what do you say to those individuals? Because there are undoubtedly those people in our industry, isn't there?
Well, I think you get that in any sector, don't you? It doesn't matter whether you're a building control body, whether you're a contractor, whether you're a subcontractor. You know, we all have to focus and try and deliver our part of that as part of the role of helping support, improving the image of construction. I mean, that is undoubtedly one to repair, certainly post-Grenfell, to improve the image of our industry and to gain customer and client confidence again.
How do we gain that confidence?
Well,
how do you do that?
When you have something in the order of 400 or so local authorities in my profession as a building control body and around about 100 approved inspectors, then we can only do our part because it isn't as if there are 5 contractors and it's just the 5 contractors who have to focus. Sure. There's a lot of people involved with that. But what you do have to do is spend time and effort to focus on the soft skills of both helping and supporting clients to deliver compliant buildings, but also working on the skills that you are also a regulator as well. So you're standing on the fence between supporting the client's needs to make sure that they are delivering a compliant building, sure, and you are helping them to deliver a compliant building by guiding them through the regulatory path.
Yeah, because you've got 2 sides to your business, don't you? You've got your building control, your more traditional side of it, and then just talk to us a bit about your other side of your business.
Well, for a good while, the majority of our focus has always been on our approved inspector role. I do seem to keep repeating the term post-Grenfell, but I think now what has been realised, certainly as part of Dame Judith's focus post-Grenfell, was that there needs to be this golden thread. Yeah. And this golden thread is about transparency from day one to completing that building, understanding that what you think you're building is what you've actually built, yeah, and that there's been a process as part of that that's been regulated, been constructed, been supervised. It's delivering what it's supposed to do.
Sure.
You know, and part of that has been the other side, which is where we carry out our role as a consultant, is to support clients when we're not the building control body. You can't do both. You can't be a regulator and a consultant too, because you'd have a conflict of interest then.
Yeah.
So where somebody else is the chosen building control body, you're supporting the client side from that point of view and guiding them through the route of compliant buildings, in support of with the building control body as well. Because really it's having more eyes on the ground, really, that's what it is. Building control in our profession isn't somebody who's there every day. We're not a clerk of works. We're not there every day. We're a peer review process. We have the building control performance standards. Typically says you should visit live construction sites in the order of about once a month during its duration.
Is that mandated?
It's a guidance. It's a guidance
okay.
to meet a standard, as opposed to, well, how often do you go? And
Sure.
if you don't have a figure to that, then it could be, well, we go at the beginning, we go at the end.
Yeah.
But you miss all the bits in the middle.
You don't see what happens.
You don't see what happens in the middle. Yeah. And that's the important side. So it's about setting out a plan at the beginning that sets out where you will visit projects and being clear and outlining some of the more important aspects. Fire safety is undoubtedly a very important area of it, and making sure that the key elements are inspected before they become covered up.
Sure.
You know?
Do you see that side of your business increasing at a faster rate than the typical control?
At the moment we're in the process of a review on fire safety,
yeah,
and there will be a different approach to regulations as we move forward, and it could quite well be that approved inspectors are not the ultimate building control body moving forward. We will be needed as a support to the client side, and I think that's the unknown. With the fire safety bill that's running through Parliament at the moment, it is proposed to tighten that regulatory path, trying to bring that vision that Dame Judith set out with regards to the golden thread, making sure that there are more people who are focusing and making sure that deliverance, and from a building control point of view, it cannot be just a building control body who's responsible. No. It's the contractor and the subcontractors and everybody else who's part of that team.
Sure. That relationship between contractor, subcontractor become more prevalent in the last, 12, 13 years following that recession?
I would absolutely agree with that, because certainly when I started in construction, you used to have lots of staff who were effectively through the foreman routes. There was trades foremen, there were finishing foremen, there was far more supervision who were effectively, if you like, on the payroll of the main contractor.
Sure.
Now, as a result of, certainly I think as part of that first recession that we had in 2006, 2007, then there was a shedding of staff, and I think construction companies were far more fragile in terms of their overall supporting structure, if you like.
Yeah.
And now, hence, what they're trying to do is make sure that they've got sufficient expertise across a variety of professions to help them to deliver a compliant building.
Sure.
You know, a building control surveyor cannot be an expert in everything.
No.
If you design the structural fabric of a building, use a structural engineer.
Yeah.
Well, Part A is part of the building regulations, but it requires the structural designer to show a scheme that is compliant.
And I suppose if you're a large contractor, largely the quality of the project you're working on depends upon the quality of the skills the subcontractors within that area. Yeah. So you could almost be limited.
Absolutely, like I said there with regards to ourselves and the training academy that we've done, that we've had to do that because we see this skills gap. It's coming towards us. CITB, many other parts of construction recognise that there is a huge need for training within all parts of our profession. And we could see it from our side, but that's equally the same for contractors.
Sure.
You don't see as many apprentice tradespeople as you would have seen maybe 30 years ago, because they were indentured and they went through a training program of being directly employed by a contractor.
Yeah.
Now they tend to be employed by a subcontractor who's ultimately, that's their role, is to deliver, say, brickwork or joinery or whatever that part might be.
Absolutely, yeah. So in terms of Salus then, in terms of the building control side of things, are you optimistic about the future in the overall industry, construction industry?
Well, we're always going to want compliant buildings. We're going to want more than ever buildings to have more surety that it does follow that golden thread. Yeah. And with expertise and being experts at delivering, supporting positive, compliant advice, then you set yourself in a good position. That's the optimism behind it. You can't have a situation whereby you basically say to an architect, design that building, sign her off that says it's compliant with building regulations. Yeah. Because ultimately they will say themselves they don't have that core expertise to do every part that shows all parts comply. Yeah.
In my conversations with a lot of our clients, a lot of them say, we don't really like this word compliance. Don't like compliance, because compliance a lot of the time means bare minimum. Yeah. So if you had the ear of government, what would you be saying to them about construction, best practice, compliance? What advice would you be giving to them?
Well, I think there's a difference there between what our role is and what ultimately might be a quality side. Building regulations are there to make buildings safe for users. You basically make sure that they stand up, that they're in a fire that it's safe to escape from. They keep you relatively warm, and they're accessible. That's the sort of health, safety and welfare provisions of the building regulations. They actually set the minimum standards of a building. But in terms of this compliance, the terminology that you use there, you know, there are people who buy new houses and they want buildings to be fit for purpose for a long time. You can see that's exactly what they want. Building regulations, we don't supervise compliance. We're not clerk of works. From a point of view of the making sure that they're a quality side, is to make sure that they meet the ethos of a safe building, effectively, a compliant building. From that point of view, again, that word compliance came back out again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's easy, isn't it? Yeah. When you talk about
it's almost as if it's become a QA process, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and a QA stamp on something as opposed to all being part of a process that helps, as I say, bring back public confidence, I think, really.
Yeah, starting from the design all the way through to, that finished building, that finished project. It's No, it is something we see on a daily basis. You know, that difficulty to get the balance right, because we talk about safety first and then compliance. It always really has to be safety and compliance, because if you're just looking at compliance, perhaps it's not as safe as it could otherwise be.
Yeah, and I think when we had our discussion earlier, we were talking about how even within the industry that you're involved with, fire detection alarm system, things like that when you receive sometimes a commission certificate that says it's in accordance with the British standard, and you walk around a building and you can see some parts that, well, there's no derivations on that certificate that says it hasn't got this or it hasn't got that. It is an interesting thing. It does rely on everybody playing their part. And again, even those who are issuing that certificate that says that it meets a British standard, whether that's for a home or whether it's for a commercial building.
Yeah. Where do you see the future for Salus as a company? Do you see more fire consultancy work in the light of Grenfell?
I think ultimately, yes, that is ultimately going to be a part of it. There will be more of an avenue of focusing on ensuring that public safety is paramount. It's more focused, like I say, but we all deliver part of that jigsaw to make sure that thread is going to be delivered.
Absolutely.
Building regulations go from the structural side right the way through to thermal and ventilation.
Yeah.
So it carries a lot of elements to what building control is. It's not just about fire safety, just at the moment. It is very topical with the fire safety bill and the actions of a few years ago.
So if you take the analogy of a smoke alarm, it's great when it's on its base, working fine, it's got power to it, the battery backup's fine, it's being tested regularly. But as soon as someone takes that off the base, you know, it's academic. If there's a fire, it's not going to do anything. Yeah. So if we relate that to building control, where is the ongoing provision, if you like, or inspection of that building after handover? Because you issue a certificate, don't you, I believe?
We issue a final certificate. The local authority issues a completion certificate.
Yeah.
At the end of that stage, the transfer of legislation moves to effectively the fire authority. Okay. And the fire authority then polices buildings. And if we think back a good few years ago, we used to have things like fire certificates, Fire Precautions Act. Yeah. So there used to be a plan with all the fire precautions marked up upon it. As part of the reform to fire safety and the ongoing management of buildings, we had the Regulatory Reform Order. Yep. Regulatory Reform Order passes over to the occupiers of the building to ensure it is their building and they continue to manage and operate their building. And as you said there, if it is tested, because if you have a smoke detector and it's in position, but it's not being maintained, it's not being tested, then it might as well not be wired up. It is absolutely not performing the intention. So all the hard work that's gone into developing the technology behind an important feature that is all part of that, again, that jigsaw to make sure buildings are safe, is only any good if you continue to ensure that they are maintained, serviced, tested, and that's all part of the responsibility of the end user. So in this building, we'll have somebody who's the responsible person. Responsible persons will carry out the risk assessment. They will look at how this building is used, who are in it, how it's being operated, if there are any fire risks, if it's being maintained. And that's the whole provision of transferring that important part of ongoing management to make sure it continues to do it during that lifespan. That's really important.
Does that link in with the golden thread? You know,
yes, it is the extension, because there is no point having a golden thread that stops as soon as the building is completed, because then people move into it. Yeah. And they move into a building, and I've no doubt that there are many people who move into, say, a new apartment, but they don't necessarily get a manual on what to do with how their building works from a fire safety point of view.
Sure.
You know, who tells them if the fire alarm sounds, who's supposed to leave? And what type of fire strategy has been developed. Yeah. That's part of the information thread that is built into that golden thread, so that ultimately that information is passed over to end users, and whether that's in a block of apartments or any commercial building, it's ensuring that that information is passed across. But if that is so important, that ongoing thread is continued during the lifespan of that building and the occupancy of it as well.
Do you think we're falling short in the UK in terms of that handover at the moment from when the building's completed? Do you think there is that vacuum of information?
I think it has taken a while for end users to realise that it is their responsibility, because brand new building's completed, contractor gives them the O&M manuals, great, move in, we just use it. That's not really the way it works, is it? You have to use it, but make sure that it continues to perform its function. And that's really where maybe better publicity is needed to ensure that communication, information, understanding what is in a building is part of that process to ensure that people understand what their responsibilities are. Somebody's responsibility inside this building to ensure that they've kept the rest of their employees relatively safe.
Yeah.
You know, somebody hasn't brought in a temporary heater that they put by a fire exit. There could become a fire, and then the next thing is that wasn't planned for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you've told us a lot about some of the great things in your industry. What are some of the challenges? What's the biggest challenge to Salus, to your company, on a daily basis?
I'd say there are probably two. One that we've touched on already is about ensuring that there's competence, ongoing competence as we move forward. I think the other one probably is we've almost driven construction and the process that it involves with regards to fees of driving everything down to the thin end of the wedge, you know, and everything that we do, all as part of a team, can only be done with resources, paid resources. And if you pay the smallest amount of fee, if somebody is trying to get, for example, building control for as cheap as you possibly can, what are you going to get then as part of that? Yeah. You are not possibly going to get help and support that ultimately has got resources that allows time to be on site to help support that compliant building. Yeah. And that doesn't matter if you want a tradesperson to work for as low as you can get them for, what you're going to get. You're going to end up with a building that's not built or looks appealing, because it won't have the resources behind it. It is really important that resources, and I would say that is the second part, is resources. And I think we need to change some of the mentality of the cutthroat of how cheap can we build buildings for.
Absolutely. Yeah, you pay cheap, you're likely to pay twice, aren't you, at the end of the day? Yeah. Well, thank you, Paul. Really enjoyed this conversation. It's been really insightful for me.
It's been a pleasure.
It's great to see someone who's so passionate, engaged and focused on best practice. It's really refreshing in our industry. I'm really optimistic about the future of the construction industry in the UK after this conversation. So once again, thank you for your time, and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex.
So thank you to Alex and Paul there for that insightful piece into building control. We hope you found it interesting. Right now we're going to head over to an advert about our installer community.
Welcome back to Aico TV. I hope you enjoyed the short advert about our Aico installer community online. If you're not a registered expert installer of ours, please sign up on the website. The Aico installer community is a great way to talk to fellow installers, complete challenges, earn points and gain rewards. But now we welcome back Will Lloyd from the Fire Industry Association, who's going to be speaking to Paul Cartwright and Andy Speake about the British standards and about the work the FIA are doing. On another note, we're really pleased that the FIA have recently accredited our new Smart Home The Link presentation that will be available soon. So let's take a look at this session and see how they got on.
Hello, I'm Paul Cartwright, National Account Manager here at Aico. As part of a retrospective look at the changing standards within the domestic alarm market, I'm joined here today by two industry colleagues who've both got experience within the standards and within creating and changing standards as well. Will Lloyd from the Fire Industry Association and Andy Speake, National Technical Manager at Aico. So thanks for joining us, gents. Will, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, not at all. Thanks for having me. Like I say, I started life as an electrician. I worked my way up and moved quickly into fire and security because it's a lot more interesting. Became a technical manager for a large national. Started working for the ECA around about 2008, which was probably my first foray into the wonderful world of writing standards. And now I'm a technical manager for the Fire Industry Association, still involved in standards work.
So were you brought into the FIA because of your experience within the standards?
That was one of the reasons, yes. Because the FIA is the Fire Industry Association, we do a lot of work with standards. We have our own councils. I look after the Fire Risk Assessment Council and the Fire Engineering Council. My colleague, Neil Budd, looks after the Fire Detection and Alarm Council, which has an awful lot of working groups underneath it, including the Smoke Alarm Devices Working Group, which Andy sits on.
Yeah. Will that be the SAD group, Andy?
That is indeed the appropriately named SAD working group. But yeah, it's a great working group. We've got all the domestic alarm manufacturers. Well, the majority of them are represented on there. We've got housing associations. We've got Fire and Rescue Service on there now. So it's a good working group, and we fall under one of the councils as well, the FD&A, which I also sit on. It's good work going on there.
Yeah, it's sort of how we start to change standards. Because we are the Fire Industry Association, we want to get an industry voice and we want standards to be suitable for industry. So it's part of our remit for existence is to help develop standards.
So is there a process? Do you look at the calendar of when standards were created, or is what we see a lot of the time, or what I see from my perspective at least anyway, is that external factors sometimes influence when standards get changed. Grenfell's probably a prime example of that. Something large happens and then it's like we need to look at the standards.
To some degree, but that's always been the case. You look back through all the history of major fires in the UK and there's always been a flurry of activity after them. For right reasons. And looking at the Grenfell disaster, one of the standards that came out of the Grenfell disaster was 8629, which is the evacuation and alert system, which I was involved in writing. But standards have a 5-year life. They're supposed to be reviewed every 5 years. And probably the most important bit of a review is the draft for public comment. The public and anybody who has an interest can comment on the standard for a period of 2 months. It's there on the internet, put your comment in and you can have a say in what the standard is. And I wish more people would comment on standards at that stage. So we can see that, we may be sitting in a committee writing a standard, but does everybody else think the way we do? We hope to think they do, but we're not always sure.
No, absolutely. I think that's something I've seen myself, that you want to see diversity on committees. So the public commentary is the chance to have that diversity, I suppose, if you're not necessarily seeing it.
Yeah, the makeup of committees is always difficult because we do want diversity of voices, and standards are written by consensus. It's not just one person driving, or it shouldn't be one organisation driving it. It is a consensus, so it should be the industry writing the standards.
Is that your experience as well, Andy?
Absolutely, yeah, I'd echo exactly what Will said. The draft public comment is the opportunity for everybody to get involved, and then every single comment that gets submitted by, it could be public, but it could be anybody at all and can put in there, and every single comment gets to go through, and you get to the DPC, that draft public comment stage on the standards review, and sometimes in the part 6 we had a lot of comments, didn't we? It took a fair few meetings to get through them, but in other standards, hardly anything. If nothing, in fact, I can think of one where there was absolutely 0 comments whatsoever. So one way of looking at that is great. Obviously, we nailed it first time. The other part is maybe not enough people have had the opportunity to see it or we're aware of it. So yeah, it is a tricky one. It's a tricky balance, but the opportunity is always there, and I would urge anybody with an interest in the industry and interest in standards to look out. You can subscribe if you go onto the BSI development website, like you would with any social media thing. You can go to a standard and you can click to follow, and you will get all notifications from the reviewing process when it hits each stage. And yeah, that's the best opportunity, so you don't miss out on these stages. So yeah.
Yeah, if you don't comment, you're not allowed to moan about the content of the
That's
standard.
it, exactly, yeah. If you miss that stage, well, forever hold your peace, or at least for 5 years.
For 5 years, yeah.
Do we need to promote it more widely then? Is that part of the problem when you're not
getting commentary? We promote it via our newsletter. Please sign up for our newsletter.
Already have.
But it's just getting traction out there and knowledge and promoting things more. It's all on the internet, it's all online, you don't have to travel. Hopefully, going forward now, because most of British Standards Committee meetings were in London, and you tend to get a London-centric and a very close people who are there. You know, how long does it take you, Andy, to get to Chiswick?
About 4.5 hours, depending on traffic,
Yeah. And hopefully with more virtual meetings, we can get different voices, because it's an entire day. For a 2-hour meeting,
can be. Yeah.
It's your entire day, more than an entire day, because it's 4 hours there, 4 hours back, plus 2 hours for the meeting. It's a 10-hour day. Where you are not earning money for Aico.
No, it's all totally voluntary, isn't it?
Yeah. Don't get paid for being on a British Standards Committee. You don't get paid for attending FIA committees. It's the other way around. You pay us to attend because there's fire membership.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
If there's anything more we can do, I mean, I'm guessing we can put up on the screen here the link to the FIA newsletter, for example. I mean, if we get more people actually aware of when the standards are due for change, when the draft public commentary is there, and giving people the opportunity to get involved in this, I'm pretty sure, you know, a lot more people would do. You know, I felt it myself sometimes with the building regs and, you know, the changes to building regs and the disparity between that and the British standard with regards to domestic alarms.
Yes.
You just hope more people would comment and say, you know, can we have some alignment of the standard?
Yeah. Well, with so many government consultations going on, so much happening legislation-wise, and I'm being very corporate here, I know, but the FIA newsletters, bi-monthly newsletter, is a great source of information, because we try and highlight what's happening in the industry, what's happening with legislation, you know, significant issues and significant things happening within the industry, and it's a good resource.
It is.
I really quite like our newsletter, and I do read it myself, because I've even subscribed myself.
That's rightly so. But no, it is right. There's a lot of information. It's just a regular interval. It's not too long. It's not too short, and it's very much click to view more. So you haven't got to read War and Peace to get to the piece of information you're after. You can just click. So no, fully agree. It's great. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it is difficult. We like to consider ourselves as having our fingers pretty close to the pulse of what's going on in the industry, but it's such. You've got multiple nations all reviewing their regulations at different points. You've got different consultations into different pieces of legislation constantly ongoing. And then you've got the standards being constantly reviewed. And obviously the FIA also hosts SIGs as well. So we all get to input into, we're mainly fall under the remit of fire detection alarm, FD&A, but But equally, sprinklers is encroaching more and more on our industry and vice versa. So yeah, the SIGs give us an opportunity to comment into the sprinkler, the wet side of things, which normally we wouldn't be as involved in. So yeah, it's a good opportunity for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes that most people don't see.
Yeah.
You know, you don't really want to see how the sausage is made.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Good analogy.
Good analogy.
So what you were saying before about because we're in lockdown now and we've been doing a lot more online meetings, and it's been easier to get teams of people together onto committees, and people are more used to actually doing that now. I'm guessing it's the same, you know, the same issue where we've got a disparity between the different sort of devolved nations as well, where you've got Scotland working to different standards of fire protection to Wales, to England. Is there more chance of us doing something about that if people are more used to actually meeting online?
Hopefully. I mean, the devolved governments have different legislation which affects the way that standards are used. So Scotland have gone a full LD2 everywhere, whereas England have not yet made that step. We would like them to make that step, and then Wales, you have to have sprinklers in all new builds, because they have control of their own building regulations, and that's one way of affecting buildings is through building regulations. Yeah. It's not the only way, because once a building's been built, it's no longer under the purview of building regulations. It's an in-use building. It falls under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, the Fire Scotland Act, the Fire and Rescue Services Northern Ireland Order. I think I've got all of those right. So then they require risk assessments, and buildings change. The use of the buildings change. The building physically might not change, but you can change the risk of the building by just changing the people. And you have to keep that in mind when you're looking at buildings and when you're looking at what is the appropriate standard to apply.
Well, I think this is, you know, it's challenges what our technical department sort of face sometimes.
We do.
Trying to give advice to the market when we've got customers working across borders, maybe in Scotland and England.
We do. The biggest one probably we get, and Will touched on it a moment ago, is contractors from England. It's a lot clearer in Scotland. It's very simplistic. But in England, we'll get a contractor saying, well, the regs say I should do minimum LD3. The British standard tells me to do an LD2. It's a private rented, and there's a private rented legislation which just says I need to stick an alarm on each floor. What do I do? And obviously we promote the standards. We say, but we are totally honest and upfront to say, well, our recommendation is to follow the British standard, LD2. However, this is what the regs say, this is what the private rented, well, hopefully the private rented legislation has now been extended to social, but it's still not meeting the LD2. No. It's not even meeting an LD3. Well, it kind of is, depends on not exactly in line with the standard. And it does. This is a lot of the calls. I'm sure you probably get them at the FIA as well. This is massive amount confusion over the disparity between nations, between standards and regs. And then legislation makes it even more confusing. And we're just talking about fire. That's before we even go into the realms of CO. Which again, it depends on your fuel source. Where is your fuel source? Have you got a flue in here? Is your flue next door? It's an absolute nightmare. So yeah, I do feel for the contractor out there. I'm glad there are helplines out to support them, because it would be very difficult unless you are so heavily involved in the industry to keep on top of knowing exactly what.
And that's before we mentioned the 3 horrible letters of HMO.
Yes, exactly. That differs depending on which country you're in as far as, I know. You can,
HMOs in London are a nightmare, because you can go 2 streets and you're in a different borough, which has different rules.
And they're considered to be Speake converted or converted properties.
And the houses are identical.
Yes, we've had our own experiences down there. I mean, we can only ever give recommendations, and the easiest way of doing that is based around the British standard.
It is.
But we will always refer people back to local rules, particularly within HMOs. I think that's always the issue. You know, and risk assessments. You know, fire risk assessments is always the key to having the right design, having the right system. You can't do that in standard domestic properties in the main. You know, you've got social housing providers with 30, 40, 50,000 properties.
It's something on a white paper in Wales that they're considering. It's generally, and obviously it's only an option at the moment, but is, at the moment for risk assessments in domestic properties, it's a voluntary thing, it's recommended, there's a lot of advantages of doing it, but unlike a commercial property, you don't have to do it. Our customers tend to do blanket risk assessments or specific ones based on the housing type, general or sheltered. But what Wales is considering, and whether they do this or not, obviously I'm hearing lots of comments about this topic, is making it compulsory in rented, that a risk assessment needs to be done. So obviously I can see the expression on Will's face of this, and I've spoken to various social landlords about their opinions of this and some of the challenges it will clearly represent. That's a big one.
There is a risk assessment process in 5839 Part 6.
There is indeed, very detailed one, yes,
So for the alarm coverage, you can do and you are supposed to do a risk assessment for the alarms. And it's very detailed, and it's very good, and nobody uses it.
Pretty much. Yeah, I'd say that's a fair approach.
So we're not expecting a mass migration of fire risk assessors from England to Wales just yet then, but...
well, you never know. There might be an opportunity there in the near future. Who knows? We'll watch this space on this.
Yeah.
It's not moving fast, but it is moving.
Yeah, wait until they see the price.
Yeah.
Have you seen the standards, the actual committees and how they work? Have you seen that change much over the years?
It changes slowly. Everything in standards world is slow because it's built by consensus. Apart from 8629, which was probably the fastest standard I've ever heard of and ever been involved with, which I think was about 9 months, and that's fast. Generally a standard is a year to 18 months in production. Because to review a standard that it already exists, it has to be, first question is, do we need to review it? Does it just need an amendment? Is there only little things that we need to change, or do we need to go through the whole thing again? So there's a difference between an amendment and a full review, and then it's, we need to have comments, and what do we actually want to change? So we have to go out and say, what do we want to change? Get those back, put those through the committee, gain consensus, write that into the standard, put that out for public comment, which is for British standard is 2 months. So that takes time. So it's not a quick process. You can't change standards quickly. Things do take time. But you see, standards more evolve than change, I always say, because new technology or new ways of doing things get brought in. And lots of people say, standards always lag behind.
I was going to ask that question. 5 years with the change in technology now and how quick that is 5 years the right thing to be looking at when you're looking at reviewing standards?
It's a set period. You've got to have a line in the sand.
Yeah.
You can, if there is a business case, to review it earlier. But standards should not lead technology. Technology should lead standards. We don't want to stifle innovation. We don't want to stifle companies producing new things, coming up with new ideas. It's not what we want to do. We want to give freedom to people to do what they want to do. And all we want to do is make sure that there is a level playing field, a baseline. Remember, standards are a minimum. There is nothing stopping you fitting a smoke detector in every house, every room in your house.
Yeah.
The standards will say, that's too much, because the standard is the minimum. It's the minimum requirements. You can always do more than the minimum.
It's very much conversations we are having with a number of organisations right now when we're talking about compliance and meeting standards. That compliance tends to be meeting that minimum required standard.
Yep.
And it should never be that. In my mind, it should always be, what's the best thing we should be doing in these properties, particularly when safety is involved as well.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, and I think it was a old Nissan, and I don't think it's still on sale. But there was at one point a car on sale in the UK which had 1 star.
Right.
In the Euro crash test.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Now that's pass.
Essentially,
it's
technically,
it's met the minimum.
Yeah. Would anybody buy it?
Would anyone buy it? Would you buy a one-star car? Well, it meets the minimum. What you want in your house, smoke alarm wise, meets the minimum. Are you happy with it meeting the minimum, or would you prefer it to be better?
That's the question, isn't it?
So standards are the minimum.
Yeah.
So
we are
please do
seeing
more.
we're seeing this move though now, aren't we, from certainly in fire, but instead of just trying to meet that minimum to get the tick in the box and the building signed off or whatever needs to be done, to actually what's recommended. Not what do I need to do, what's the bare minimum, but what is actually recommended, what should I be doing, not what do I need to do. It's kind of a shift in attitude, which is good. And we're seeing this with a lot of our customers who are, they're doing an LD2, so they're following the standards, which is great, whether they need to or not. But then they're doing LD2, but their LD2 coverage is including bedrooms, possibly due to risk assessments they've done. So they are going above, and they're taking a strategic approach to it. They're maybe not going for an LD1. They don't want to commit to an LD1. They probably don't need to go with an LD1 in a lot of scenarios. But they also are taking an informed decision and doing right. And you're absolutely right. With table 1 says minimum. Big letters across the top. Nobody ever sees it, but that's a minimum requirement. So it's not what you should do. It's the minimum what you should be doing, really. So yeah, it's a point well made.
Just going back to standards, the standard for smoke alarms, which the original one, which
14604 or
no, prior to 14604,
5446.
5446. Back in the 70s, one of those devices cost about 50 quid.
Yeah,
Which is equivalent to about 700 nowadays, if you take into account inflation.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah.
I can honestly put my hand on my heart and say a smoke alarm doesn't cost £700 anymore. So this is it. New technology comes in, it starts getting expensive.
Yeah.
Standards get written about it, which means that it's not just a company pushing a product. There is an agreed way of doing it. Standards are an agreed way of doing something, and that drives the market, hopefully.
It's a good point, actually, in terms of trying to not stifle the market by bringing out a standard before the actual innovations have been created and being adopted in some way or form, I suppose. Coming in later, you're helping bring that product to market, help bring enough volume through to actually make it sustainable.
Yes.
Without stifling the market and putting, this is the standard we need now, but it's going to cost you 10 times more than you're currently paying, and no one can do it. So
the other thing is, by letting technology lead, we can see where it fails, and we can write standards to make sure that failure won't happen. So we're after consistency of performance, we're after consistency of installation. The product standards, there are declarations of performance because it falls under the CPR. There are declarations of conformity because there are European directives and legislation that forces conformity to EMC, low voltage directives.
that's the part I think you must struggle with a little bit with the standards, where you are referring to other standards within the standard you've created, and then that other standard changes.
Normative references, yeah.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. How do you deal with that? I mean, is it the way you write the standard to account for changes in those normative references?
There are two ways of referencing a standard within a standard. You can just say its name. 7671 is the electrical installation standard. So I can reference that if I want to say I'm going to install something. It needs to install 7671.
Yeah.
6300033 is an EMC standard. The current one is 2019. The previous one was 2004. If I want to reference a specific clause, I really should reference the date, which locks it. So if you say you must comply with clause 13 of 63003-3, 2004, that locks it
Yes.
in.
Yeah.
But if you just said 63003, it would be the latest version. That is how you were supposed to be.
There is a skill in writing these things then, because I'm guessing there's been a lot more standards created over the years. You know, back in the day there were probably less standards, and as things change, we're getting more and more standards now, more and more normative references. So you need to be. I'll go back to the building regs again. You know, the building regs referring to the British standard, saying, you know, to meet building regs you must meet the minimum requirements of the British standard, and it was referring to an old British standard. The standards have moved on, and yet people are still referring to a minimum requirement within the old standards.
Yes.
You'd hope that there'd be a reference in there to say, you know, as standards change.
That's what building regs have written. They choose to write what they like. That's the government for you.
So, I mean, do we need legislation to drive this, or should we just be trying to get people to adopt best practice?
I think we should try and get people to adopt best practice, and I think legislation should recognise best practice and just reference it.
Yeah.
Let's not just go for minimum. Let's not just have one-star cars. Let's do it properly.
That sounds fantastic to me. Definitely.
We've seen it more and more. Well, we've seen it more. We're not seeing it enough. But we are seeing a bit of a change where regs do want they can't know everything, and they do want to signpost to various standards. We're already seeing it to a point, just not enough. And I think that's a better way of doing it. Standards are updated far more regularly than building regs are.
Yep.
They're kind of updated on an ad hoc basis. Standards schedule every 5 years. Do we need to update? Probably so. Certainly with fire, electrical and things like that, they are updated. And yeah, I think the regs should be taking that approach really. But equally, that's not for a customer to wait for a regulation to be updated. They should be actively best practice approach, exactly what you're saying. There's no reason why not. And it's the best. It's the best for yourself. You know you're doing the right thing. It's the best for the building. It's the best for the occupants of that building, whether it be commercial, residential. It just makes sense all around, really.
Do we see enough resident engagement within the standards committees? You know, when we're creating these standards, I know governments are pushing for more resident engagement and resident involvement in safety. You know.
One of the problems with standards committees is to be on a British standards committee, you need to be representing a organisation, really. You shouldn't just be there as a company, because that's you just driving your company's agenda. So, for instance, on FHS 12, there is Electrical Contractors Association, the IET, the Fire Industry Association, National Landlords Association, British Fire Consortium. There's various bodies, including NFCCC, National Fire Chiefs Council. But yeah, residents is one element that tends to be forgotten, especially on the domestic side. But it's difficult because who would represent residents?
You've got it to a degree, the NRLA, which is the Landlord Association, residents, and that. I know they've amalgamated, and the R is for residents, but that's still only one part of a big organisation, and the chances are it's probably not going to be a resident physically sat there in the committee.
And it's still really representing landlords as such. I mean, that's it. That's their role, I'm guessing. I mean, there are organisations like TPAS out there, you know, tenants organisations. I just think we maybe need to do more as an industry to try and give that resident voice a little bit, you know, higher importance out there, I suppose. Getting we need to know what the homeowners are thinking. I think when we're creating standards and when standards are being set, the homeowners, you know, at the heart of the delivery. The occupants of that property is at the heart of that delivery for that standard. We want them to be safe. So, you know, we need to try and get their voice, I think, out there a little bit more.
You do see it a little bit more. This is one thing for the government. Government consultations will tend to take into account residents. They'll often approach, certainly Scotland are a great example of this, where before the Scottish legislation, with a blanket introduction of LD2, they reached out to various different resident groups. It wasn't just residents, risk assessors, insurance. There was all sorts of different groups represented in that consultation. So they do tend to bring in that, and that's absolutely right. If you're introducing legislation that affects the homeowner, then absolutely they need to be involved in that. Is it going to cost them money? Is it something they need to do? Is it something they need to know about? So yeah, that's a big difference. The standards tend to be more experts, professionals, driving what's the best thing. Because yes, We need to get residents' input, absolutely, certainly with legislation, regulation, which inputs on them. But equally, we can't expect a resident to be an expert in fire detection or what's a current practice for evacuation, or all these different complicated aspects where, you know, the fire and rescue expertise comes in, or maybe a manufacturer or residents, landlord association. There's the various different parts. So yeah, I think it's tying it all together. Everybody's got a place to play in this and pushing it all forward, but it's just making sure that everybody just get that opportunity.
That's something.
That's the most important thing.
That's something we need to do a little bit more of, I think, in terms of promoting the standards. As you say, we can put up the newsletter link up here to try and get more people aware of that and signed up, and hopefully you can go back to the business and say, yeah, we've got some more numbers now because I've done the video today. But I think definitely, you know, we can do more to promote this out to, you know, to resident organisations. We are keen to, you know, be a part of that and make sure that this message is getting out there for safety. So I think the more we can do, the better.
I mean, totally agree. There's a lot of information on our website. I would say nearly everything on our wetbsite isn't behind a paywall, isn't behind a login. It is all freely available.
It's great to hear.
Because the ethos of the FIA is we would like people to be safe and we'd like people to do it right. Therefore, we're not going to hide that information behind anything. We will quite happily tell you, we should do it properly. Here, this is how you do it properly.
This is all one, just going back to committees, you mentioned FSH 12 before, I think. Will's got some good news, Andy.
Yes, am I right in saying you're now the new chair of FSH 12?
Yes, I am the new chair of FSH 12.
So congratulations on that. I think it's a fantastic post. So FSH 12, for those who wouldn't know, is like the parent committee. FSH 12 is a branch of BSI standards governing fire. So all the different standards, whether it be 5.39 Part 1, Part 6, they all then filter up to FSH 12.2, 12.1, whether it's fire engineering, they all come under FSH 12. So it's
all the product standards as well.
It's great. That's even more
more fun.
More fun standards for you.
Well, it's congratulations to you anyway, and I'm sure you're going to be very busy over the next
sure I will be.
Coming months and years, but appreciate you coming down today and talking to us about this and obviously sharing your knowledge. You're obviously going to be sharing your knowledge a lot more now moving forward with the new post. But like I said, thanks again for coming, and thanks, Andy, for joining today.
Pleasure.
Appreciate
Thank you very much. Thanks, Will.
It was great to hear from Will Lloyd from the FIA there, talking about the working groups within the FIA, discussing the changing standards and how the FIA are promoting best practice. We're now going to take a short break, and we've got an advert showing our EI 1000G Gateway. That was the proud winner of the House Builder Product Awards recently. It won Best Health and Safety Product. See you soon.
Introducing the SmartLink Gateway and Cloud Portal service from Aico. A new and innovative product developed with registered social landlords and housing associations, giving you complete control and reassurance when monitoring and maintaining your stock of alarms through SmartLink Cloud Portal. Easy to set up, the Gateway is a roaming 2G GSM-based device, ensuring maximum connectivity possible without the need for local broadband or Wi-Fi services, increasing efficiency while remaining compliant with legislation. Featuring real-time alarm status, fault status, text alert and email notification capability for both fire or CO and fault events, as well as installation reports and replacement and fault reports. The SmartLink Gateway and Cloud Portal service is your total solution for alarm maintenance and asset management. The smarter way to check your tenant safety at any time. SmartLink, a revolution in tenant safety.
So as it's Thursday, we thought we would do a little throwback. So we're going to head over to the first instalment of a 3-part mini-series with our Regional Specification Manager, Tony Boyle. We're going to be taking a look at his Ideas Lab that he did in partnership with the Chartered Institute of Housing. So we'll head over now.
So over the next 45 minutes to an hour, we're going to be speaking to a panel of 4 regarding a very topical issue, which not only affects the social housing sector in Scotland, but all property owners and tenants. So really just to set the scene on this, Following the Grenfell tragedy in June 2017, a consultation was opened by the Scottish Government. This really begs the question, should this have been UK-wide? Why is it just selective to Scotland? And this consultation was seeking to obtain views of possible changes for fire and seal detection in all Scottish homes. So those results were published on March the 18th of 2018, showing strong support for the standards which apply to the private rented sector at the time to be applied to all homes across Scotland, regardless of tenure. The Tolerable Standard Order 2019 states that alarms should be installed in the most frequently used rooms for daytime living purposes, hallways and landings, heat alarms in the kitchen, and all of those smoking heat alarms should be interlinked. Okay? Essentially, that is what we would call a category LD2 system, as defined by the British Standard BS 5839 Part 6. There is also a requirement to fit a carbon monoxide alarm at a fuel burning appliance, or where there is an extended or a concealed flue. Battery alarms are allowable, so alarms that are solely powered by a battery, grade F1 we call them, and so are mains wired alarms. One point that really springs to mind for me is the lack of standardisation between different parts of the UK. So I'm delighted to be joined by some great participants this morning, and I would like to introduce those speakers. They're going to give a little introduction to themselves, their organisation, and just their initial thoughts on the new tolerable standard.
Good morning, everyone.
Simon.
My name is Simon Roberts. There are a couple of slides. Do you want to put them up just now, Tony?
Got a couple of slides for you, Simon, I believe.
Thanks. I assure you there's only a few. I'm not going to spend all day to my slides. Okay, so that's just who I am, my contact details. I work for the Scottish Government. I am team leader for housing standards and quality, which means looking at standard issues, things like obviously the fire and smoke alarms, but also things like water, physical condition, safety issues across housing tenure, so affecting private housing, owner-occupied housing and social housing, and also looking at energy efficiency with reference to the social housing sector. If we go to the second slide, there's a brief timeline of where we are, how we got to where we are today. A lot of what Tony's already said. I think one of the key points for me, though, is back in 2016, we realised the need to make a fundamental review of the standards we have and how they work, and whether differences between different tenures were a problem. And one of the things that was identified as part of that was fire alarms. But then when the Grenfell tragedy happened, we decided to take that element out, deal with it separately. We dealt with all the regulations and everything. Coronavirus came along last year and obviously had an impact on everyone in all kinds of ways. But one of the immediate concerns we had was that the deadline we'd had for this new standard, which was to come into force the 1st of February 2021, just a couple of weeks ago, needed to be put back, and now that's been changed so that we're coming to force on the 1st of February 2022. The next slide is an overview of again, Tony mentioned this, of what the standard consists in. Can we have there we are. So there's a list of where alarms ought to be, what alarms should be in the different places, and an overarching standard that the alarms should be able to be interlinked. That means they communicate with each other. If one goes off, they all goes off. And a rule about what kind of power source is allowed, that they should either be mains wired, as you'd have in a new construction, but it's perhaps more difficult when retrofitting, or that they should have these long life sealed battery units so that the battery can't be removed from the unit and the battery will last as long as the recommended lifespan of the unit. And the next slide, which I think is the last one. We just got that. There we are. So why is it needed? Essentially, what alarms do is they're intended that if you're asleep in your bedroom and one goes off in the hall outside your bedroom, it will wake you up. That's what it's designed to do. But fires start in other parts of the house. So if the fire starts in another part of the house and the alarms are interlinked, you should be woken up, and that increases your chance to escape. So it's a safety measure. Obviously, it's much better not to have a fire in the first place, and that would be the priority. But if there is a fire, it increases your chance of warning. increase your chance of getting out and protecting your family. And that's what it's all about. That's my introduction. Happy to pass on to the next person.
Can we bring Lenora to the stage, please? Hi, Lenora.
Hi there. Hi, everyone.
Just a wee introduction from yourself, Lenora, please.
Yes, sure. I'm here as a tenant and resident representative, having lived in one of Aberdeen City Council's 59 multi-storey blocks for 45 years, the last 10 as an owner-occupier. So have witnessed firsthand the Scottish Government's quick response in the wake of the Grenfell tragedy, and also Aberdeen City Council's swift implementation of the legislation in partnership with the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Both of the latter visited each building to reassure the occupants and answer any concerns they had. I commend them all for this. As Tony has said, I'm also on the Scottish Government's National Fire and Safety Panel with several other tenants and residents, and we have been involved in consultations, producing posters, leaflets, signage, etc. And I'm glad to say that they do take our comments and suggestions on board. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we bring David Bookbinder to the stage, please? Hi, David.
Hi, Tony. Thanks very much. David Bookbinder. I'm Director of the Glasgow West of Scotland Forum of Housing Associations. We've got 64 members, 40 of whom are in Glasgow. The rest are spread around 8 or 9, 10 local authorities in the west of Scotland. A couple of quick thoughts. I still remember where I was when I turned my radio on, walking to work on that morning in 2017, and the horror of it all that I'm sure every one of us felt. So nothing I want to say today is around about underplaying what happened at all. It is just, though, about looking across the range of measures that have come since then, some of which may have come without Grenfell, but I think a lot come because of Grenfell. And having a sense of, hoping that policymakers will remain proportionate about responses. Remember, Grenfell was high-rise. A lot of the measures we're talking about that have come since and are coming in the future are about all housing. So we really got to be careful not to overstep the mark. Anything that's proposed, not one MSP is ever going to vote against them. You don't vote against protecting the people. Not one journalist is going to say anything other than, yes, we need to protect the people. So there's always a momentum there. Once you set something going, it's very hard to stop it when it's about fire safety. And I suppose I would just say, I think the alarm measures, the detector measures that we're mainly talking about today, Tony, I think are pretty much proportionate. I mean, it's a few hundred quid for each house. We can argue about implementation, and we'll talk about that later. I'm not sure I would say the same thing about sprinklers in every new house. I think there's a lot of issues, technical issues, funding issues to come there, because and ultimately, if we're not careful with all these measures, it is some of the poorest people in Scotland that end up paying for them. So it is just about wanting to be, hoping that we can all remain proportionate even after terrible tragedies.
Good. Thanks very much, David. Really looking forward to hearing you speak later on. Can we bring our last participant to the stage, please? James Ward.
Good morning.
Thanks very much.
I'm James Ward, Director of Asset Management from Barhead Housing Association. We're a community-based housing association in East Renfrewshire with 947 units. Similarly to some of the stuff that's already been said, specifically David mentioned there, we have no qualms about what's being proposed in terms of tenant safety. Probably similar to a lot of people who are here today, our issue will be around the financing of this and the ongoing financial commitment and the spin out from this in terms of the measures that have been introduced around about compliance, quality assurance, and fitting them into an already established 30-year financial plan without any support with little notice. So without getting into too much detail just now, that's the type of stuff that we've had to consider over the last couple of years.
Brilliant, James, thanks very much. So we've got a variety of people here, Scottish Government, and we've got it from a tenant's perspective, an asset manager's perspective, and from a maintenance perspective as well. So really looking forward to what we're going to hear today. So I'm just going to kick off with some questions, really, and I'm going to direct questions to each participant. So I'm going to start with Simon first. So the first question I've got for you, Simon, so obviously working with the Scottish Government, you've been involved with these standards to a real extent. So really, what was the kickstart of this? Why did it take Grenfell to happen for this to really start moving, or was this something that was considered long before Grenfell?
Well, we would have preferred to look at all standards together, not to look at fire safety and isolation, but to look at a modern housing standard for Scotland. What we have, our central basic standard for all houses is a piece of legislation that was originally introduced in 1969. It's in a 1987 Act now, but all it did was reintroduce that provision. And the history of it goes back to Victorian times. It's about houses being fit for human habitation. And really, in the 21st century, we should be looking at housing that meets people's expectations and the right to be in a decent, adequate house that meets people's needs and address those things. And that's a bigger discussion. It is something we are looking at, and there'll probably be a consultation later this year on what a new standard could look like, what the elements of it could be. So fire alarms were just one small part of that piece of work. But what Grenfell did was it raised the urgency to be aware of these things and the anxiety people were naturally feeling when something like that happened. I remember, like David said, I was up in Munlochy at the time on holiday and I was watching the news. And I was like, how is it possible for a building to burn like that? We know they're designed so that fire doesn't spread in that way. How is it possible in the 21st century to see what we're seeing on the telly in front of us and a building to behave like that? And it really drove a need to consider these issues. And we felt one of the things we should do is to bring forward that element on fire and smoke alarms and deal with it in isolation and bring forward the pace that was dealt with quicker. It's not, there's always lessons to be learned. In some ways, it's been useful for us to go through that experience, and that can inform what we do with the other elements. But so yeah, it was something we were considering, but the timing was changed because of Grenfell.
Good, thanks very much, Simon. Lenora, we're going to move on to yourself, unless anybody else has got any thoughts on what Simon's just stated there. So Lenora, the first question I've got for you, so we heard from you earlier, so you are chair of a citywide multi-storey group, yep. Okay? So what would you define as feeling safe in your home? So from a tenant's point of view, how would you define feeling safe in your home?
Well, I have to say, in all my years of living here, I've never felt unsafe. Certainly in the pictures from Grenfell's, several tenants in residence, as you can imagine, were very nervous until the fire service visited each building, explained things to them, and the different rules and the different types of cladding that we had. I think it's settled down, but I think their unease, unsafe feeling comes from their fellow individuals in the building. You know, what they get up to and what they do is more of a challenge, shall we say, than the fire safety.
Yeah, and I'm right in saying you're actually a private homeowner living in,
yes.
in a tower block. That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Often we ask that question: what do you define as feeling safe in your home? And it's not only defined to fire safety, but there's a lot of other issues. You know, a lot of people associate that with like antisocial behaviour and stuff like that. You know, so
yeah.
Really good to hear that, Leonora. David, I'm going to move on to you next here, right? So one of the biggest talking points for your organisation was the talk of loan funds for the tolerable standard. So did you see a large take up on the loan front from your member RSLs? And it has it really assisted with completing works on time?
Well, the on-time issue, of course, has had other interruptions, as we all know. I mean, it was welcome because the speed of the implementation, associations looking at potentially 200, 300, 400. Well, the original thinking was you got ranges of 200, 300, 400 quid a flat, whatever it may have come out a bit lower than that, a bit higher. I don't know for different associations. I think there was a lot of interest in the loan scheme. I don't hand on heart know how many of our members in the end took it up, but it's very welcome because it did help spread out the cost. I do think there was perhaps an issue that the loan scheme, if I'm right, did take. I know how things, finance stuff in government never moves as quickly as the officials probably want it to, and I've got a feeling it was May or June before the money was ready for the loan scheme, 3 or 4 months after the implementation date had started. But it was all welcome, yeah.
Good. Simon, comments on that at all? You're on mute.
All these different machines in front of me. No, I agree with David. The loan scheme doesn't reduce the cost to landlords. All it does, as David said, is spread the cost. It smooths that curve a little bit so that you can do the work over 2 years, whereas your normal cycle planning would be over a 5-year period, and that's all it's intended to do.
Do you think if the tolerable standard had been maybe taken over, or there was a deadline of a latter deadline that wasn't done over 2 years, that loan fund could have been released elsewhere for other kind of programmes for RSL?
Well, it's possible. I mean, one of the things that came out of the consultation very strongly is people wanted us to give a 1-year implementation period. They thought this needed to be done and to be done quickly. So there is a very strong view in response to that consultation in 2018 that we should have implemented this with a 1-year timetable. And in some ways, the 2 years was a compromise to recognise the fact that that just wasn't practical for a social landlord who has a large volume of houses and needs to plan the work. And we knew that we thought 2 years was achievable, but the finance was a technical problem that we could do something to address.
Good. James, seeing you shaking your head there. Any comments on that, James?
A 1-year implementation of any program's hard enough, never mind a fire safety, that where you're trying to convince people with the merits of why you need access to their property to disrupt them for not any, what they can see, any real benefit in terms of what a kitchen or a bathroom brings to them. But there's other asset management considerations to be taken into account. There were existing alarms in these properties. So it wasn't as if social landlords had neglected the responsibility for tenant safety. We had a standard, and those things have a life cycle attached to them, normally 10 years. So from our point of view, we were having to make a decision to replace systems that potentially were replaced within the last 2-3 years anyway. And from our point of view, the decision had to be to replace them all and start from scratch, because from a programming point of view and a budget, we can't have half a system that was done at a certain point and another system that's getting replaced then, because programming it later in our 30-year plan becomes difficult. So there's a whole host of other things that notionally doing it in a year would be terrific, but we've now got to consider what we've spent and making that almost written off, which when we live in a world of value for money and keeping rents down for people, then that's money effectively that we've had to write off with no any material value to tenants or the association.
Yeah, we'll move on to that kind of as we get further down the line with this. Just my next question was for you anyway, James. So the one I've got for you here really is when it comes to, we're talking about assets here. So I mean, how important is fire safety in terms of being top of your agenda when it comes to your protecting your assets?
It's one of the top things at the moment, because we've got to meet compliance. From our point of view, originally, as Simon had touched on earlier, the deadline was February 21, but it's now been moved to February 22. But the reality of it is that because we were talking about a 1 year or a 2 year implementation in terms of what we had there, it may well be a priority for us, but the marketplace is pretty crowded and people trying to get that service delivered. So from our point of view, we need to make sure that we can actually do that and do it at a cost that's not going to impact on other things that tenants are going to look for. We also need to recognise the issues about access that I mentioned earlier. Getting in to do these things is tenants don't want you in their property all of the time to do that. So it is a priority, but we've had to focus on how we can deliver that and minimise the disruption to tenants.
So we hope you enjoyed the first instalment of Tony Boyle's Ideas Lab. That is part of a mini-series, so keep tuned in for future instalments. Alex, would you like to tell us about today's FAQ?
FAQ, yeah. Today's FAQ, we have what sensor types are available in the market. This FAQ is going to be presented by Kieran Smith, who was a technical advisor and is now part of the communications team. Or is it the IT and data services team? It's one of the teams. Anyway, let's go to that FAQ and take a look.
Here at Aico, we supply a variety of single sensor and multi-sensor alarms. The smoke chamber design uses the light scatter principle to detect smoke. You will not experience false alarms from cooking fumes. They are suitable for hallways, landings, living rooms, dining rooms and bedrooms. The chamber has an integrated insect screen and in the 3000 series a unique automatic dust compensation feature to further reduce the risk of nuisance alarms. Ionisation smoke alarms are sensitive to small smoke particles. The units contain a minuscule amount of radioactive material to ionise particles of air, which ultimately produce a current between two metal plates. When smoke enters this chamber, the current is reduced, causing the alarm to activate. Ionisation alarms are susceptible to nuisance alarming from cooking fumes and suitable for bedrooms. The thermistor has a small thermal mass, enabling it to give faster alarm responses when the trigger temperature of 58 degrees is reached. The alarm is best for detecting heat buildup from large flaming fires. Heat alarms are suitable for kitchens and garages. Carbon monoxide alarms contain a high-performance, proven electrical chemical sensor with a 10-year life. The sensor is individually calibrated and tested in CO gas to ensure accuracy. The CO alarm is capable of triggering at different speeds depending upon the level of CO detected. CO alarms should be sited between 1 and 3 meters of a fuel burning appliance. The multi-sensor fire alarm contains both optical and heat sensors to provide total fire coverage. Intelligent software allows it to detect all fire types, surpassing traditional single sensor alarms. In addition, an integrated insect screen and unique dust compensation algorithm reduces the risk of false alarms. The two sensors work independently of one another. However, if the heat sensor detects a significant rise in temperature, this will reduce the trigger threshold for the optical sensor, allowing for a faster response. They are suitable for hallways, landings, living rooms, dining rooms, bedrooms and loft spaces. The multi-sensor heat and carbon monoxide alarm contains our proven fast-acting Class A1 thermistor to detect fire, as well as our proven electrochemical CO sensor to detect the presence of toxic levels of CO. This provides protection from both fire and CO in one alarm. The unit offers visual indication as well as differing sound patterns dependent upon the activation source. They are suitable for kitchens and garages.
It was great to hear from Kieran Smith running through the different varieties of sensor types with one of our frequently asked questions. Hopefully we don't run out of frequently asked questions, otherwise the most important part of the episode would be missing. If you do have any questions that you would like answering by the team at Aico, please email marketing@aico.co.uk. But we do have some live events coming up and some virtual events. Holly, you're running one of the virtual events coming up. Can you tell us more about that, please?
Yes, so our next virtual event is on Wednesday the 9th of June and it is going to be exploring what is a healthy home. So alongside some of our Aico team members and some more, I can't say it.
Alongside our Aico team members, we have some keynote speakers
we do.
talking about fitness for human habitation and the Homes Act.
Yeah, one of those.
One of those, yeah.
And a decent home standard.
Yeah. If people wanted to register for that event, Holly, how would they do that?
All they need to do is visit our Eventbrite page, which is
The link is on the screen below. Saying that, you can visit our website, and there'll be a link on there for you. Holly here's got the uncontrollable giggles. This is what 11 episodes of Aico TV does to you. We could push her off screen, but we'll leave her here for comedy value. Please subscribe to our Aico YouTube channel, and you can also follow us on our social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Sorry, Holly was not able to join us anymore. Please stay tuned, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.